Okay. So welcome back, everybody. Today's class number 19 in Sefer Shemot, and one of our early classes on the second half of Sefer Shemot. And today's going to be the first class where we're going to delve into the Mishkan itself. As a word of introduction, even though the Mishkan is something like 4,000 years ago in Chumash and doesn't seem relevant today, what I want to show you is the center of our Jewish day-to-day life, at least at a communal level, is going to shul, the synagogue, the Beit Knesset, is a key part of our Jewish day-to-day life. I want to show you how understanding the Mishkan can help us understanding the Beit Knesset, because the shul, or the Beit Knesset, is what's called a Mishkan Ma'at, or Mikdash Ma'at. Not that it's smaller in size, but it's the same core principle. For whatever reason Am Yisrael needs a Mishkan, that's the reason we need a Beit Knesset. So if we can understand better what the biblical purpose of the Mishkan is and how it relates to Mamad Har Sinai and how it relates to being Jewish and our connection to God, then our study of Sefer Shemot will be very relevant to our day-to-day Jewish life. That's a word of introduction, and we're going to focus on that. Now, the title of today's share, as I'll show you in a minute, is we're going to identify the Mishkan unit, but the question is going to be, is the Mishkan going to be a reflection of revelation of Har Sinai? That's the famous Ramban approach. Is it going to be what's called a tikkun for Chet HaEgel? We'll go with that later, not today, but in the classes to come, which is the classic approach. Or might it be a reflection of creation, which is something which I want to show you today as well, if we have time. But of course, we're going to see it's going to be all three together. When you follow the Mishkan, it's going to remind us of creation. That's just the story of creation, also the purpose of creation. It's going to remind us of revelation of Har Sinai and our commitment to be God's people. It'll be an encounter with God that will remind us also of our relationship with God, that He can forgive us in light of what happened in Chet HaEgel and the whole world of repentance and Shuvah. So we'll see all those in the Mishkan. Okay, so let's get to work, and I'll share my source sheet. I'm going to put the source sheet one more time in the chat, now that more people are logged in. Here's the source sheet one last time. And now I'm going to try and find it on my computer. That should do it. Okay. Here we go, class number 19. The sub-series is the Mishkan, a house for God, Ramada, home for us. We're going to go with the second half. And the tabernacle itself is a reflection of creation or revelation, as we'll discuss. Okay. Okay, I copied something. Okay. So I don't know what happened here. Oh yeah, here we are. So this is our outline we've been talking about every week. The Mamad Har Sinai unit, chapters 19 to 24. We talked about that unit. Today we're going to focus on the yellow, the unit to build the Mishkan, and not the entire unit, just the first part of the unit. The unit will be a little complicated. There'll be one big unit and a couple of small units. We're going to focus today on the big unit and try to identify it and see how Chumash presents the idea of the Mishkan. Afterwards, we have the unit of Chet HaEgel, and then we build the Mishkan, but that's going to be in the weeks to come. Last week, we discussed the 4 boxes. Remember? We did those. Today, we're going to focus on this box, the commandment to build the Mishkan, chapters 25 through 31. So let's see how the unit begins and just pay attention to it. Now, just as a reminder, let me open up my Chumash for a second. I just want to review what we saw last week. We will share my regular Chumash. Here we are. We're going to find a Chumash here. That's that. Oh, here we are. Okay. That's the email. Here we go. Shemot. There we are. Okay. We are in Shemot at the end of chapter 24. If you have a regular Tanakh open, notice if you have a Tanakh at home, it'd be much better to open it up. It's just be hard to see it when you do a parak at a time. But at the end of chapter 24, Moshe goes into the Anan and Moshe's up the mountain. Moshe's on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. That's chapter 24. Chapter 25, God speaks to Moshe. Now, we've done this many times, but if you can follow in a regular Tanakh, it'll be very helpful. Every time God speaks, every time there's a unit of Chumash of laws, it's always embedded inside of a dibur. By Daber Hashem Moshe Lemor, that's the classic introduction. Sometimes it's a little more longer or complicated, but that's a classic one. God speaks to Moshe saying, quotation mark right here. I need to put a quotation mark like that. And we're going to study now and see where this quotation mark ends. God starts speaking to Moshe Rabbeinu in Pasuk Bet. I'm sorry, here. Daber b'nei Yisrael v'yichud li truma. And basically, here's the commandment. And let's find out when God finishes talking to Moshe Rabbeinu and see what's inside. Okay. So the first commandment is going to be va'astu li mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham, to build this mikdash so I can dwell among them. We'll return to that line later on. But the first commandment, of course, is to make donations, whatever the cause might be. So take a donation, and we have to have gold, silver, and copper, of course, and all these different materials for building the Mishkan. Okay, and then I'm going to show you on the mountain the form of the Mishkan and all of its vessels, and then you will do it. Now, just as a word of introduction, we're going to pay attention to, I want to just go one little introduction to how the presentation of the Mishkan relates to creation. Because you remember creation, going back to, let's look, open up a Chumash real fast, clear the lines, and go back to Breshit. There we go. Oh, that's not good. Breshit. If you remember, day one, every day of creation begins with Vayomer Elokim. Remember, God commands, and then God does. Vayas Elokim. Vayomer Elokim yikavu amayim. Okay, and it happens. Remember, there's a command and a execution. Elokim says Yimorot Birkei Hashamayim, and Vayas Elohim et Shnei Amorot. Follow. There's a statement. There's a commandment by God for something to be done, and God Himself does it. Vayas Elokim. Was the previous one? Vayas. Either it says Vayichen or Vayas Elokim et Harakia beforehand. And God says, we saw this, Yimrot Birkei Hashamayim, Vayas Elokim et Shnei Amorot Agdolim. What happens next? They hear when God makes the birds and the fish, Vayivra Elokim, not just Vayas, but He does the creation. And then on day 6, what's the command? Vayom Elohim Totzei Haaretz Nefesh Chaya, etc. Vayas Elohim et Chayat Haaretz. So you see that God commands and God does. Guess what we're going to find now? God's got a command, and we're going to do. V'chein tasu. God commands and we do. So in the presentation of the Mishkan itself, there's already a reflection of the story of creation, and maybe reflecting how we become partners in God's creation, or might come to remind us of how God created, and He made man in His image, and we basically are in the service of God. And if we do something, it's because God gave us the ability to do that. So God commands and we do. Now, let's go back to where we were before. Let's go back to Sefer Shemot. That was the end of Chaf Daled, and we opened up Perek Chaf Hei. What's in Perek Chaf Hei? We're going to see the unit in a second. The first commandment, Vasu Aron Atzei Shitim, to make the Aron that's going to hold the Luchot, the ark, the Luchot, the tablets of the covenant. There'll be the Aron in the middle. We'll have the kaporet, which is the cover. Here, v'natata el Aron, you put inside the Aron the edut, which God's going to give them, and then you make the kaporet, the cover for the Aron, and then into the kaporet we're going to put the edut, which God's going to give to Moshe Rabbeinu. And remember, in the previous chapter, what we saw in chapter 24, God tells to Moshe, come up the mountain, I'm going to give you the Luchot HaEven and the Torah and the Mitzvah. And that's why we say the simplest explanation was God's going to give Moshe Rabbeinu the tablets and the structure that's going to hold the tablets, the instruction book of how to build the Mishkan and the commandment to do it. Even though we're going to disagree with that at the end, but that's the most logical explanation for how the unit begins. So that's so the first thing is the Aron that holds the Luchot, which is a symbol of the Brit. And then after we have the Aron, we have the Shulchan, the table, that's going to be in the Kodesh, and then Vasita for the menorah. So all of chapter 25 is basically everything made out of gold, everything Zahav, gold. A Shulchan is going to be gold, Tzipito Dozav Torah, going to be made out of gold. The Aron will be made out of gold. So basically, all the vessels that are indoors, inside the Mishkan, are made out of gold. They're called the Klei Zahav. Chapter 26 is going to be the structure that's going to house these vessels. At the Mishkan Ta'aseh, 10 covers, 10 curtains, not curtains, blankets. They cover them that are woven. That's the Mishkan. And then poles that are going to hold up that cover, called the Krashim. And the parochet, the curtain, is going to divide between the Kodesh and Kodesh Kodeshim. So basically, the structure is chapter 26. We're going to go over this in a minute. But God's still talking in this one Dibor. Chapter 27, God continues to talk. Everything begins with Asita, another command to do. The outside Mizbeach, the altar, where we offer the korbanot. It has to be outdoors because there'll be fire and burning animals, etc. And then the Chatzer around the Mizbeach, that's going to enclose the courtyard, that'll hold primarily the Mizbeach, where the people bring their korbanot on a daily basis.
Why
At the
would
very end, we have the
people,
commandment to build to take shemen, to light the menorah, oil for the menorah. That seems to be a bit out of place. We're going to review this in a second. God is continuing to speak in chapter 28. Again, he began in 25, he's continuing. Chapter 28, commandment to bring Aaron close to you, to make him a Kohen together with his sons. And then Vasita, again, the commandment, Big Day Kodesh for Aaron, your brother, for his glory, etc. And then we need people to make the Big Day Aaron, etc., to people to weave it, etc. And then the commandment to make the ephod, and then the Choshen Mishpat, and again Vasita, and again Vasita Mil ephod, Vasita Tzitz, again, and there's the Big Day Kuna, chapter 28. Chapter 29 will be the ceremony. Again, Zeh Devar Ta'aseh, again, the verb to do. To turn the Kohanim into Kohanim, we need a 7-day ceremony called the 7 Days of Miluim, and that's going to take us till verse 37 through verse 37. That's a 7-day ceremony to turn the Kohanim to Kohanim. And finally, V'zeh tasal Mizbeach, here's what you put on a daily basis on the Mizbeach, what's called the Korban Tamid, a lamb in the morning, a lamb in the evening. We'll return to these psukim in a minute. But God's still talking to Moshe Rabbeinu. And in chapter 30, God continues talking to Moshe with the law to build a Mizbeach, what's called Miktar Toret, for the incense altar, which is also made out of gold, and it's also located inside the Kodesh, but this seems to be a bit out of a place. We'll talk about that soon. And then that's going to end the unit. In other words, God started speaking in chapter 25. The next Dibor is not until chapter 30, verse 11. So I simply wanted to show you that there's one unit, one Dibor that began in chapter 25, goes all the way to the middle of chapter 30, all about the Mishkan. One long Dibor. Afterwards, we're going to find a lot of smaller ones. There'll be another Dibor about the Machzit Shekel, another Dibor about making the Kior, another Dibor about making the Shemen HaMishcha, the anointing oil, another Dibor, God's going to speak in about making the Ktoret, how to make the Ktoret. There'll be another Dibor about appointing Betzalel to make the builder, and one final Dibor about not the builder on Shabbat, and then we pick up the narrative of Chet HaEgel. Again, so there's one very long Dibor, chapters 25 through 30, and then from the middle of chapter 30 through 31, there's going to be 6 small Dibors, and of course, in case you didn't notice, 7 times God speaks to Moshe Rabbeinu in this unit, and the 7th Dibor, the 7th time God talks, is going to be about Shabbat. So again, that might be a tremendous coincidence, but of course it can't be. Something's going on here. Again, a reflection of creation, as I mentioned before. But we have to go back and do the unit. I simply wanted to share with you going through Tanakh, identifying the unit.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
If you compare it, it makes no sense how the order. Like when you have the Briat Haolam, you have the background first and then what goes inside. Why would, why would it start with the things that go inside and then have the structure? It seems
so
like
Rashi asked the question and says that was Betzalel's question. So Betzalel says first you make, first you make the house and then you put the things inside.
Exactly.
Yeah. So when we discuss that's going to be the order when they build it in Parshat Vayakov Pekudei. So the order is not how to build it; it's what's most important. We're going to go thematically. What's the most important part? So now, if we go back to our source sheet and take a look at the unit, so we had the introduction, Bikuli Truma, and here's the different things you need. And again, the big point is the introductory line, Ba'astu de Mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham. Now, and I'm going to show you how to build it, Tamdit HaMishkan and Tamdit Kol Kelav. Again, B'chein Ta'asu, I'm making big deal about the word Asot. As I'm here, B'chein Ta'asu, V'asu. Again, the commandment to do as God commands. Now, here's a big question. This line, build the Mikdash and I'll dwell with them. is that in order to bring the Shekhinah? Right? In other words, do we lose the Shekhinah and it's bringing it back? In other words, if this is all after Chet Egel, as Chazal say, then it could be building the Mishkan is going to be something Am Yisrael needs to do to bring the Shekhinah back. Got it? If I keep Chumash in order, which Ramban's going to do, right? I need the Mishkan to keep the Shekhinah that hasn't left yet. In other words, the Shekhinah was with us on Har Sinai. In other words, you can't miss the word Shekhinah on with the Mishkan. God will dwell among us. Again, if I go back to, let's go back to, this is what the Rambam makes a big deal about. If I go back to, where are we? Back to my Chumash. Here it is. If I go back to chapter 24, right before this commandment, what happened? Moshe goes up the mountain. Vayam Moshe lahar. Vaychas hanan tahar. The cloud covers the mountain. Vayishkon kvod Hashem al Har Sinai. Okay, God's Shekhinah rested, His glory rested on Har Sinai, right? And it was covered by the Anan for 6 days. God calls Moshe on the seventh day. The people see this fire burning. Moshe goes into the Anan, and God speaks to Moshe for 40 days and 40 nights. So you have the word Vayishkon kvod Hashem al Har Sinai. We have the concept of Shekhinah. And then God says, build a Mishkan v'shechanti b'tocham. So it's not that the Shekhinah left and we need to do something to bring it back, but rather the Shekhinah was with Am Yisrael on Har Sinai, and now we want to keep the Shekhinah with us. So like we got this present in Har Sinai, we have the Shekhinah. We don't want to leave Har Sinai, we're going to take it with us. And that'll be the approach of Ramban, is that I don't need the Mishkan because I need to bring the Shekhinah back. I need to build a Mishkan to keep the Shekhinah with us and be able to travel with it. Hope that's clear. Two different approaches for why we need a Mishkan. Did something go wrong and now I need something to bring it back? Or is everything fine and we need the Shekhinah that we had on Har Sinai, we need to bring it with us and make it portable. So therefore, the Shekhinah didn't leave yet. It's with Moshe on Har Sinai, and we're going to leave Har Sinai on the way to Israel, and we need to take the Shekhinah with us. So I would need the Mishkan even had not been for Chet HaEgel. So we have to keep that discussion in our background, and I'm going to show you as we go through that both approaches are going to be correct. There'll be an element of truth to both, and we'll try to explain how both can be right, even though they seem to contradict. Now, going back to our source sheet, let's look at the outline. If you ever have time on your own, it's something that's kedai to do. Whenever you have a unit like that, build an outline. To follow the topic, simply make a list of every topic. Let's go identify the unit that's what we just did. We did the unit, the first Dibor, from chapter 25 to the middle of chapter 30. Make a list of the topics which we just went through and turn them into an outline. Okay. So we'll get to the Tzelem looking part in a minute, but if I make an outline, which is very simple, what we did, it's very logical. Why? We have the introduction of donating the materials. That's how you start. And the purpose of the project, Vasuli Mikdash, B'Shachanti B'Tocham, as we pointed out. Then we have the vessels in the Kodesh Kodeshim, which is the Aron and the Kaporet, which is going to house the Luchot, which makes a great way to start, because thematically, if the purpose of the Mishkan is to continue Har Sinai, if the big event in Har Sinai is the covenant we make with God, if the written covenant, the contract, is what's called Aseret HaDvarim written on the Luchot, remember Luchot HaBrit, then the symbol of Har Sinai, or reminder of Har Sinai, will be this covenant. Therefore, I want to keep this moment of Har Sinai with us forever. Therefore, I need a kli, I need a vessel to put the Luchot in. I need to travel with those Luchot. They have to be with us all the time, and therefore I need a Mishkan as a place for the Luchot. And therefore, when I come and visit God, I'm remembering Har Sinai. That's Ramban's approach, makes perfect sense. Now, therefore, the first, your question, Dory asked, it's out of order. This is not a program for the contractor to build. Rather, what's most important? What's the center? What's the center of the Mikdash? If you ever built a house and sat with an architect, the first thing he tells you, besides after you deal with the money side, is that describe for me how you live your day-to-day life. Describe for me, it's what you do on a 24-hour basis. What's your day-to-day schedule, and based on that, he'll decide how big the kitchen needs to be, how big the living room needs to be, how big is your family, how many people do you have, how many people working in the kitchen, and based on the day-to-day functions of your house, he designs the house. So the same thing, the purpose of the Mikdash is going to be the Luchot HaBrit, and therefore the first vessel, the first kli will be the aron, of course, is made out of gold because gold is the most precious metal.
So you would say the same thing for Briat Haolam. If the purpose is like Adam, then everything else is leading towards it, because it's not sitting like well with me.
Oh,
That
that's a great question. Is the purpose of creation, and God makes man to keep creation to keep creation in order, or is the very purpose? That's why in Gan Eden, the first thing God makes is man.
right?
We're in this story of creation, the first thing God makes is nature, Shemayim va'aretz, and then man is put in charge of his creation. But your question is exactly the background between the two stories of creation and what's man's job in creation. And we'll see the Mikdash will reflect that as well. Now, remember man's job, but Shevet Levi is lavod v'lishmor, just like man in Gan Eden, lavod v'lishmor. Now, um, now, if it was just the Aron, that's one thing. But in the Kodesh, what do we find? No, it's again in the housing, in the sanctuary itself, in the tabernacle. In addition to the Aron, there's other kelim, there's other vessels in the outer room. There's a table that has bread, eh, and a menorah candelabra that has light. Now that models our home, doesn't it? Every home, in our own homes, we have a table we eat because we're humans. We need bread, and we give light. Now, not only do we have bread and show off our bread and have light, making bread, the whole process of making bread is unique to being human. Remember the idea of Tzelem Elokim we talked about in creation? The God made man with the ability to be creative, and we explain how Tzelem Elokim is how man is reflected by how man is different than animal. And one of the key things that differentiates man from animal is domesticating wheat and the whole process of bread making. And therefore, making the whole process of making bread is going to be symbolic of man's creativity and man's day-to-day life. So don't be surprised that bread, which remember we know in our day-to-day life has a special bracha. Remember, Hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Don't be surprised that we have a shulchan where we show off our bread. Called lecha b'panim lefanai tamid. That itself reminds us of creation and man's being in Tzelem Elokim. If Tzelem Elokim is how man's different than animal, also man's ability to make light, right? That's just industry, but no other living thing makes light on their own. They sleep at night, or they have eyesight. They can, like owls can see at night and things like that. Humans need light to see, but we make our own light. We make the candle. So we take oil, we make a little menorah, a little ner, etc. We make a wick, etc. And that's part of man's Tzelem Elokim as well, and that's part of our Mikdash, reminding us of the ability to make light, to see. Of course, or is a big theme of creation as well, and to be able to give light. And remember, or that's already a deeper topic. Okay. Now I need a tent to house these kelim. So the tent has like every tent has a canvas and a pole. Okay. Remember, a tent, the walls and the ceiling are the same material. So I need the uriot, the blankets to cover the structure, the poles to hold up the blanket, and the parocha that divides between the two sections between the Kodesh and Kodesh Kodeshim. Okay. Then I have a courtyard, but in the courtyard it will be the Mizbeach where we bring sacrifices, and that's not a Jewish Kiddush. That's every religion in ancient times had a symbol of a god and an altar in front of it, the Mizbeach in front of a symbol of God. Of course, our symbol of God will be covered because we have a God that can't be seen. But we have an altar. We bring sacrifices. But what animals do we bring? The animals from day 6 are the domesticated animals, the animals that man makes a living from. Remember, domesticating sheep and goats. Remember, that's how man gets clothing from the wool. And he gets milk, he gets his food, and he uses the ox to plow the field, etc., and also for food. But domesticating animals, basically being a farmer as well as also being a shepherd and being a boker, I guess they call it a cowboy, taking care of cows, etc. Okay, that's also unique to man and reflects the Tzelem Elokim. And the animals, the Behemat Torah that we bring, are also always animals that we're domesticated, that are part of our day-to-day life, as opposed to a chaya, which is not a korban, a wild animal.
Why does the Mizbeach have kranot, karnaim, kranot Mizbeach?
Yeah, it could be. Listen, the overall, it's not we're copying the other nations. That's protocol. I'm assuming all altars had corners like that. Or I have to check whether that's common to all religions. But I think it's part of architecture. But also you need something to sprinkle the blood on. Now, the four corners, do they reflect the four corners of the earth? Remember, Kanfot Haaretz is a common theme that comes up several times in Tach. And remember the four directions in Yaakov's dream, Yamav V'Kedma Safona V'Negba. So it could be relating to the four directions. We'll deal with the four directions when we talk about how we orientate the Mizbeach as well. I think it also relates to creation with the idea of we connect to God in one place, but we spread out in all four directions. If we have time, we'll go back and relate all this to Yaakov's dream in Beit El, where Hashem is Nitzav Alav, and God tells him, from this place we can spread out in all four directions. Remember, Fratz Yamav V'Kedma Safona V'Negba. And now the idea of connecting to God, the sulam going up and down, and emanation, not a mikdash where God's in a cage, but a mikdash where God emanates and has an effect on our society outside the mikdash. Okay. So then we have the Mizbach HaOlah, called the Mizbach HaNechosh, made out of copper. We bring our korbanot. And then we have the Chatzer, where we need poles and curtains to make a courtyard, or not covered, but just a mechitza that delimitates the courtyard that'll hold the Mizbech. Now, for some reason, the oil for the menorah at the end of chapter 27 seems to be out of place, right? Because it should belong with the menorah over here. If the commandment to take oil for the menorah was in chapter 25, no one would blink an eye. Yeah. Let me just show you something real quick. Stop the share and we'll go back to chapter 25. When we have the commandment to build the menorah, in chapter 25, we have the commandment to make the aron, makes sense, and what to put in the aron. We make the shulchan, and what do we say at the end? V'natata al shulchan lechem panim lefanai tamid. We have the commandment to build the shulchan, and we mention what we put on the shulchan. Now, what we put on the shulchan, for some reason we don't find until Parshat Emor at the end, in Vayikra chapter 24. We won't go there now. But the general idea of lechem panim on the shulchan is in chapter 25. And therefore, when we make the menorah, it would make sense that I talk about the oil for the menorah. So it says at the end that we make 7 candles to put on the menorah, and where to put them. But the oil for the menorah and lighting the menorah, and how do we light it, is not detailed until later on. And therefore, the first lines of Parshat Tetzaveh, which is the last 2-3 lines of chapter 27 about the oil for the menorah in the outline, if it was in chapter 25, it would make more sense. For some reason, it's taken out of where it should be and put somewhere else. Now, if I go back to my outline, I'll try to give a reason why. Go back to our outline. We have the oil for the menorah. Where's that? Right here. Oil for the menorah. It seems to be the oil for the menorah is the introduction to the Big Day Kuna. Because whenever we find something about the Kohanim, we relate it to the menorah and lighting the menorah. Let me take a break and try to explain why. What's the main avodah? What's the main? There's what's called avodat tamid. What's the main avodah that's done in the mikdash on a daily basis? What's the routine avodah that we do in the Beit HaMikdash?
Lighting the menorah.
The Ola Tamid.
So the nation brings an Ola Tamid. There's always a keves, a symbolic lamb in the morning, and a lamb in the evening. Why a lamb? If we have time, we'll talk about soon. Why that's the most classic domesticated animal, because it gives us clothing and gives us food and gives us children. It's the most multi-purpose animal. One of the many things we domesticated as part of our day-to-day life, but it's very symbolic to what we do on a regular basis. And then that's what Am Yisrael brings, the nation brings. What the Kohanim do, they switch the bread only once a week. That's a weekly thing, switching the bread. The daily commandment is to light the menorah, and we'll see later on, bring the Ktoret is in order to light the menorah. Right? We'll see later on, the main commandment is lighting the menorah. In order to enter the Kodesh, to light the menorah, you have to bring the Ktoret. You follow the difference? It's not two separate things. It's not two different things. We'll see soon. The main mitzvah is lighting the menorah. Remember, Kiner mitzvah v'Torah or, and that the idea of the job of the Kohanim is to give light, which will be their idea of teaching Torah and spreading the concept of God, the ability to perceive God. If that's the main mitzvah, in order to enter, I need Ktoret. We'll deal with that later on. But I say the focus of the menorah is going to be the main job of the Kohanim. And therefore, before I get to the Kohanim and the Big Day Kohuna, I introduce it with Shemot HaMishcha, which comes from the people, right? So the Kohanim can light the menorah. But I think it's, again, I'm not sure if that's right, but I'm trying to explain. There's a glitch in the outline where the oil for the menorah is out of order. It doesn't belong there. I'm trying to give a reason why it might be out of order. Let's go back to our source sheet. Okay, and now we get the complicated part. We get the Big Day Kohuna, the whole chapter, and then we have the 7-day inaugural ceremony, which is very complicated. But in a nutshell, in order to make these people Kohanim for 7 days, of course, that relates to creation again. I have a ceremony that takes place for 7 days. On each day, there's a special korban, which is a chatat and olah. We'll see a par chatat and ayol olah. It's going to be what's called a korban machshirin. It prepares them. Now, is that chatat? We'll see. Is that sin offering because someone did something wrong? That'll fit if we say it's after chet ha'egel. Or does the chatat have nothing to do with sin? Give me an example of people who bring a chatat and olah who didn't necessarily sin. Because who has to bring a chatat olah on a regular basis? It has nothing to do with sinning.
One lady who gave birth.
That's right. A Yoleh that gives birth, because once she gives birth, she can't come to the mikdash because she's too busy. She has to take care of herself, take care of her child, take care of herself, and recover. God doesn't want her running to the mikdash right away. Wait a couple weeks when the time comes. But in order to return to the mikdash, I need something to bring myself back in. Now, same thing in Nazir. When his time is over, he brings the chatat olah. That brings it back to whatever level he's going to return to. But basically, even if Tzorah and Pshat didn't do anything wrong, I know the Midrash tries to relate them, but you can get skin diseases and you can't visit the temple because you're contagious, maybe whatever it is. But you're outside the camp, and now before you come back into the camp, you need to do something symbolic to mark the return to be able to serve God again. So it could be it's called a korban machshirin, offering that changes your status, and the 7-day inaugural ceremony might be the model for that ceremony. And we'll deal with that in detail when we get to Yom HaShmini. That's going to be we'll see Am Yisrael on a regular basis has to reestablish themselves as a Mamlechet Kohanim. And therefore, we're going to have a very similar ceremony once a year called Yom Kippur, where Am Yisrael brings the Chatat and Olah that's going to restart the year and make us Kohanim again. So that even the 7-day inaugural ceremony seems really complicated and detailed and technical, I think it'll help us understand the idea of the need to renew on a regular basis our relationship with God. And the Kohanim are served the nation in the Mikdash, but they're a model for how Am Yisrael has to serve the other nations. Because we're Mamlechet Kohanim, again, a theme from Har Sinai. And then finally we have the Olat Tamid. Now after the 7-day inaugural ceremony, the daily Korban on the Mizbeach is the end of chapter 29. And then the most out of order thing there could be is at the very end of this unit, we have the Mizbach Toret. Got it? Which clearly belongs, you don't have to be a genius to figure out that Mizbach Toret belongs in chapter 25 with the Aron, Shulchan, and Menorah made out of gold indoors. That's a no-brainer. So it's clearly left out, and we have to understand why it's left out. But to appreciate why it's left out, we have to go back and read the end of chapter 29, which I want to show you is a perfect ending of the entire unit. Before we read chapter 20, the end of chapter 29, the Olat Tamid, just review the outline. We have the opening commandment, V'asu l'mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham, got it? The vessels of the Kodesh with the Aron, where God will speak to Moshe Rabbeinu. Then the vessels in the Kodesh, the Ohel Moed, with the tent that covers it. And then the Chatzer, we have the Mizbeach, where we bring our korbanot. Then we have the Big Day Kohuna, the inaugural ceremony, and the Olat Tamid. So we're going to read now this last section. Let's read the Korban Tamid. This is the end of chapter 29. What I want to claim is this should be the end of the unit. For some reason, this Mizbach Torah is added at the end, but let's read it carefully. Again, the verb on a daily basis we do on the Mizbeach. Kvasim b'nei shonat bimim shnayim l'yom olat tamid. We know this, one lamb in the morning, one lamb in the evening. Based on this, we have shachris and mincha every day. Remember tefillah keneged karbonot. We'll try to relate to that when we finish this whole unit. Okay, the kevis in the morning, kevis in the evening. Okay, and we, of course, we bring flour. We bring the domesticated animal, domesticated wheat, and of course wine, which is processed food and special for man, and with the right amount based on the size of the animal. And the second kevis in the evening. Remember bein arbaim. There's a vayer vayiboker yom echad. You see the reflections of creation. You can't miss the idea vayer vayiboker. At the chevesh at taseba boker, but that bein arbaim. It's screaming vayer vayiboker. So before we do anything, before Har Sinai, there's something about the Mishkan which reflects creation. That's one of the main goals of the shir today, is that you can't miss the idea, the number 7, the 7, candles on the candelabra giving light, the 7 days, the 7 days of the Miluim, etc. And the specific animals we're bringing, and what we're showing off our bread, especially with this idea of Selim and Lukim that we talked about, it's a beautiful reflection of creation. Of course, man needs to remember every day, not only that God created, but why he created, and why he gave man the ability to be creative. That was the thing we did from Breshit. And the concept, let me just jump to tefillah. When we go to shul or pray, you're not only praying, you're not coming as a consumer, oh, I need something. I believe in God, you can help me, come help me, give me what I need. I need to remember my relationship with God. Most of our prayer service, when we go to meet God, we need to remember our relationship with God, not only who God is and he created, but to appreciate your creativity that God made you b'tselem Elokim. And on top of that, notice you need at the universal level a reminder to appreciate that God gave you the ability to be human, to be creative, and the whole gift of life and nature. Just to appreciate that, to remember that. That's Yotzer HaMa'orot, etc. On top of that, you need to appreciate and understand why you were chosen to serve him on top of that. So the reflection of creation relates to your existence as a human being, part of civilization, and being thankful to God for the gift of life itself. And then the extra responsibility, being a member of God's people, God's nation, to keep his Torah and represent God as a nation, as a Mamlechet Kohanim, that's level 2. So finding parallels to both, it's not one or the other, it's finding parallels to creation and revelation, which are super important. That's what I have to remember. That's all you need to remember from the share. If I can study the Mishkan and appreciate why we go to shul and how that should affect you, that's already enough. Of course, I should have said that in the beginning instead of waiting for 45 minutes. Okay, now comes the fun part. Now, we have a summary. Olat Tamid L'Dorotechem. This Olat Tamid will be for all generations. Where do we bring this Olat Tamid, which is again brought by the people? Petach Ol Moed, at the entrance to the tent of meeting, in front of God, Lifnei Hashem. Asher Yivei L'Chashama L'Daber L'Chasham. At the center of the Mikdash is the Aron. Remember, we have our Ark of the Covenant. And on the Aron, God will continue to talk to Moshe Rabbeinu, maybe if there's more mitzvot. But our relationship with God will continue from Har Sinai to the Kodesh Kodeshim, because we're going to meet, Ivaid is to meet. God's going to meet Moshe, or later, God's going to meet Am Yisrael in the Kodesh Kodeshim. It's going to be one special area, which is representing God's presence, and we get to meet him, but we'll see later how it's going to be a buffered connection. In a nutshell, the Mizbeach outside represents, and the Olat Tamid represents Am Yisrael. The Kodesh Kodeshim is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and we have to meet somewhere in the middle. So we're going to meet, but it'll be a buffer. Now, what do we have at Har Sinai? Who is on Har Sinai at the top of the mountain? Moshe with the Luchot, but no one else can come up with him. Only you go up, Moshe. Now, was that the ideal only because I had the Egel? We'll deal with it later on. Was all of Am Yisrael supposed to be on Har Sinai, or only Moshe? It's a whole discussion going back to chapter 19. But bottom line, it was only Moshe on top of Har Sinai, and therefore the Kodesh Kodeshim, where Moshe gets where we house the Luchot, represents Moshe receiving the Luchot. On Har Sinai, an elite group of 70 Kenim and Aaron, Nadav and Avihu went up and came closer to God, representing the people. That's parallel to the Kohanim. And then the people stood at the foot of Har Sinai, and there was Mizbeach with Lot and Shlamim at Tachtit Har, and that's going to be the Azara with the Mizbeach. So you see that you can't miss that parallel. Now we have it here. So this Olat Tamid representing the Jewish people. is facing the Ol Moed, which is like standing at the bottom foot of Har Sinai, the place where God is going to meet us to speak to us, to communicate with us. Okay. V'no'adati shama livnei Yisrael. I'm going to meet the Jewish people there in this tabernacle. V'nikdash b'chvodi. It'll be separated. Ooh, what happened now? Okay, let's get rid of that. Okay, sorry about that. V'nikdash b'chvodi. But again, remember Kvod Hashem was on Har Sinai? And now the Kvod Hashem will be in the Mishkan. It'll become kadosh. It'll be separated in the service of God. We could end right here, but listen to what happens next. In addition to the Kedusha now in the Kodesh Kodeshim where we meet God, V'kidashet Ol Moed, got it, attend the meeting, and the Mizbeach, Bet Aron Bet Banav HaKadosh L'Chaim Li. Isn't that a perfect summary of the whole unit? The Ol Moed notes, V'noati Shem L'Bnei Yisrael, Petach Ol Moed, I'm sorry, where God's going to meet to speak to us. That's the Kodesh Kodeshim, that's chapter 25. And then the Ol Moed is chapter 26. Remember the Mishkan with the Prochet, etc., and the Yuriot of the Mishkan and the Krashim. The Mizbeach is chapter 27 in the Chatzer. Okay? And Aaron and Banav, that's chapter 28, the B'dei Kehuna. And chapter 29, the 7-day ceremony where this we do to them to make them Kohanim. And now I summarize the whole unit. You see, these psukim is simply a beautiful summary of the entire unit. You can't miss it. Okay. And to put icing on the cake, what happens next? V'shechanti b'toch b'nei Yisrael. Remember how the whole unit began. Vastu l'mikdash v'shechanti. That's it. Remember, vastu l'mikdash v'shechanti, that's v'shechanti b'toch b'nei Yisrael. V'gidashti, remember, it's Ol Moed. That's this whole unit. Ol Moed. Bet HaMizbeach. Bet Aron b'nav HaKadosh L'Chaim Li. Got it? And that's all the summary of the Olat Tamid, which shows you how the Mizbach Torah is way outside the unit. It's outside the Shechina unit. So let's go again. Now, where's that coming from? Where's the first time we had the phrase Liot Lachal Elohim? Hope everyone remembers.
With Abraham.
When with Abraham Avinu?
Yeah, Brit Avot at the
Which
chapter
one?
17.
Yeah, Brit Milah. Now, it's the Brit of Brit Milah. The covenant, circumcision is the Ot Brit. The Brit is Liot Lachal Elohim, but them to Lilam. That's the core covenant of Chumash. That's the fourth cup. L'chatchem Lilam. God took us out of Egypt. Remember Liot Lachal Elohim? We mumble that at the end of Shema every day. It's the purpose of redemption is to become God's people at Har Sinai. Now, and therefore, Vastudim V'shachanti. But the goal of Har Sinai, Vatem Tu Li Mamlechet Kohanim V'Kadosh, and therefore, Vaiti Lechem Elohim. And then when I have this Mishkan, I have this tabernacle that represents this relationship, then they'll know and understand v'yadu. It's visiting the Mikdash will be a constant reminder to ingrain in your brain. Ki ani Hashem Elohechem. That's the first line of the Ten Commandments, isn't it? Anochi Hashem Elokecha. Asher tzeitet etchem eretz Mitzrayim. Isn't that screaming Har Sinai? The Shochni b'tocham. Ani Hashem Elokechem. You can't miss the Mishkan being a reflection of revelation, got it? And Har Sinai, commitment, as well as reflection of creation. That's enough for a share. Okay. Now, the problem is our unit doesn't end here. The unit has a Mizbach Torah at the end. It's not left over, it's called left out. What's it left out of? I call this the Shechina unit. Why am I calling it the Shechina unit? Because that's what it is. Vasuli Mikdash v'shachanti. That's how it begins. And ends with v'shachanti b'toch b'nei Yisrael. So I call that the Shechina unit. And now we get, it's up until now, I don't need Chet HaEgel. Got it? What's the problem now? If God's going to dwell with us, are we worthy of having a Mishkan? So now I need something. So now I'm suggesting that the purpose of Mizbach Torah is going to be different than all the other kelim. The kelim, I reflect the idea where we encounter God, but now I need something to show God that I possibly might not be worthy of that connection. And that'll be the Mizbach Torah, because all of a sudden in the Mizbach Torah we have the concept of kapara. Let me just show that quickly, that we'll need to dedicate a whole share to that. But let me stop the share. I should have put it on the source sheet, my mistake. I'm going to share back a Chumash. I'll just do an English Hebrew Chumash to make it easier to see. Exodus, here we go. Chapter 30 we needed. Okay. Again, this clearly belongs to chapter 25 from a technical point of view. Just like the Aron, okay? Just like the Shulchan as well. Okay. Now, where do we put this Mizbach Torah? Listen to the placement. Listen how wordy Pasuk Vav is. Where do we place this Mizbach Torah? V'natata oto lifnei haporochet, asher aron haidut lifnei hakaporet, asher haidut asher betach hashama. Isn't that wordy? It could be. Where's the porochet? Where do we put the Mizbach? In front of the porochet, which is covering the aron haidut. In front of the kaporet, which is covering it, the haidut, where I'm going to beat you. In other words, I'm placing the Mizbach Torah on the axis that connects the Mizbach outside, the Mizbach HaOlah outside, and the Aron inside. In other words, if I draw a line from the Mizbach HaChitzon in the courtyard to the Kodesh Kodeshim where the Aron is, what's located right on that axis is the Mizbach Torah. And what comes up in the Mizbach Torah? We'll have an Anan. Remember, we'll have a cloud. It'll make a cloud Torah, which makes a type of a buffer. And if I'm going back to the parallel to Revelation, to Har Sinai, what do we have? We have an Anan that's separating the people from God. So lots of things separate. The Mishkan itself separates. The Porochet separates. But we have this buffer between our connection to God. So God can dwell with us, but we need some type of buffer, right, that shows that even though we're close to God, we have to keep our distance. Maybe they call it a dialectic, where on the one hand, you want to be as close as possible. On the other hand, you have to keep your distance. Now, we had the same dialectic in Har Sinai, if you remember when we studied chapter 19. How close were we supposed to be in Har Sinai? Remember 3 days of preparation? Right? Were we all supposed to go and meet God on the mountain? But then we all chickened out at the last minute. It was how close were we supposed to be to God on Har Sinai? We discussed that when we did chapters 19 and 20. But the Mishkan itself reflects that same dialectic, where on the one hand, we need to be close to God, but and then we have to keep our distance from God. And what's going to represent the buffer between God and the people? The Mizbach Torah. And what do? Listen carefully now.
But the parochet, it makes the distinction. The parochet is what separates the
which should be enough. So that's the question. Here's your question is, how many levels of protection do I need? Got it? How many layers of protection do I need? Do I need and how much is the need for kapara because of Chet HaEgel? I didn't have the word kapara yet in the Kelim. I have it in the 7 days of Miluim. But again, that has to do with the
what is kaporet? Because kaporet is the same.
Kaporet as well. Yeah. The question is
the same root as kapara. It's the same.
Sure, yeah, because it's a protective cover of the Aron. Is the Mizbach Torah is an extra layer of protection because of Chet HaEgel or part of God's original plan? That's what we have to see. We're not gonna take sides. We're gonna show both sides and the logic of both. But now look carefully what I want to point out now. Okay. Look how it's different than the other kelim. Why? V'tira alav aron ktoret samim baboker betibot naktirena. When does Aaron need to bring Torah? When he goes in to light the menorah. That was my point. When he goes to clean the menorah, I'm sorry, in the beginning, when he goes to clean the menorah. When he goes in to light the menorah in the evening. So whenever the Kohen goes in to either clean the menorah or light the menorah, he has to bring Torah. I'm saying the Torah enables entry. Give me an example of a holiday where that becomes even more important. When does Aaron enter something even closer to God?
Yom Kippur.
And what does he need? He needs to bring Ktoret. In order, Ktoret enables entry. The goal is not to bring Ktoret. The goal is to enter. To enable entry, I need to bring Ktoret. Now, is that based on the basic nature, man, because man can't get that close to God? Or is that because we're not Oref? Got it? So for right now,
make a cloud.
What? We had a cloud in Har Sinai before Chet HaEgel.
The Ketoret is to make a cloud.
But yeah, keep it anan arela kaporet. Remember Yom Kippur? So the cloud's going to protect them from but the question is it because I've done something wrong, or it's a sign of humility of appreciating you can't get that close? Okay, that's is it, put it this way, is the Torah going to protect you from the Shekhinah? right? Now, give me a story that you might have heard where Torah doesn't always can save you. No, we had this week's parsha, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Well, if you're in God's presence and you're not worthy, you'll what do you call it? It can explode. But if you're worthy, you can survive. So what saves the people from the Magefa? Remember, Aaron takes the people said, "Hey, it was your idea to give the Torah test. Remember, you killed Atam Amitem et Hashem." They're blaming Moshe for the thing. I feel bad, but I gave a bad analogy on Shir on Shabbat. I said I feel bad for Moshe Rabbeinu. He does everything to save the people. Remember, he's praying for them. Remember, he saves them. He goes out of his way to pray all the time to save them, and all they do is accuse him of being corrupt. I'm not taking sides. It was just such a cute little analogy of someone dedicating his whole life to saving the people, and the people would just accuse him all the time of corruption. It doesn't mean that people aren't right some of the time, but Moshe Rabbeinu was that was just interesting. But I point this out now because the Ktoret protects from the Shekhinah. You can't miss that in Parshat Korach. And I think Moshe was suggesting the safest korban to bring. You want to bring korbanot? Give it a try. The safest korban to bring would be Ktoret. And the people say, "Oh, you set them up so they're going to die." Right? And then to show them that no, it wasn't a setup, Aaron saves them with the Ktoret, and that solves that problem. So I'm just showing you that the Ktoret at the end of the day, no, you can't bring any other. You can't bring Torah Zara. That gets us into trouble. That's another Naviu. And here's the key thing. You can't miss the connection now between Yisbach HaKtor and Yom Kippur. Now, Yom Kippur, is that because of Chet HaEgel? That's easy to prove. Because the date of Yom Kippur. But once a year, okay, the entire Mikdash needs kapara. And where do we do it? On the Yisbach HaKtoret. Got it? So this once a year cleansing of the Mikdash. Remember, if you did Daf Yomi recently, what's the Tzitz Mechaperon? What's the korbanot we need? What's called Tumat Mikdash V'Kodashav. The Mikdash needs regular cleansing from what type of sins? From Tumah, from people, from whatever it might be. But the Mikdash needs a yearly kapara. Now it doesn't say what day to do it on yet. Got it? We didn't hear about Yom Kippur yet. Now, does this it's just referring to our Yom Kippur? Or even had not been for Chet HaEgel, I would do this once a year, maybe on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. But after Chet HaEgel, I decide to do it on Yom Kippur. Okay, that's Achrimot. Remember, Achrimot. It's the last line. Vayitazot lachem lechukat olam. But after we have the whole avodah of Yom Kippur, they say, "Oh, by the way, do this on the 10th of Tishrei." Is that because that's when we got the second luchot, or that was God's original plan? Whoa. That's a great whole again. I'm not taking sides. I'm showing you how complicated it is. But the main thing I want to show you today that the Misbach Toret, there's something special about it. And it's why it's called. I have to give you a class later. Why it's called Kodesh Kodeshim because it's not in the Kodesh Kodeshim. But what the phrase Kodesh Kodeshim in the Mishkan doesn't always mean the Kodesh Kodeshim, because both the Misbach Toret and the Misbach Hitzon are called Kodesh Kodeshim. Why? There's two levels of separation. We'll have to explain that later on. That's the end of the Dibur, but it's so beautiful that we have this whole encounter with God, the Shekhinah, and then as a postscript, we have this Misbach Toret, obviously has something to do with buffering the encounter. Now, is the reason for the buffer, again, because we did something wrong, or that was God's original plan? That will be our discussion. Just quickly, back to our source sheet, and our time is up. Back to my source sheet. I just put on the source sheet because I gave it away before. We had the summary we had, and then comparing to Brit Milah. Remember, what's the Brit Milah? Remember, we had again all the theme Brit Milah and creation go hand in hand for sure. Remember, Pulurvu, etc. Fakimoted Briti B'nei V'necha. Remember, Dot Lachad Lalukim. Oh, so that's Brit Keshet. That's all. I'm not doing that now. Brit Keshet is a promo to Brit Milah. But Brit Milah's, but not Briti B'nei B'necha, Barbel, Kimot Briti, Lot Lachad Elohim, and I'm giving you the land of Israel, Lot Lachad Elohim, and those Brit will be circumcision. And we'll see later on, we'll do this in a different share, that Shabbat itself, the end of this unit, will be Shabbat, which will be an Od Brit. The Shabbat itself, which is the last unit of the Mishkan unit, and the day we switch to Lechem HaPanim, etc., will be the Od Brit for Har Sinai. Okay, that's all share. We'll do it later on. I shouldn't have put it on the source sheet. I'll dedicate a whole share to that later on. We'll put this source sheet for next week. It's too long a share to do quickly. Again, today's share with the main thing I wanted to get across was the unit, the Mishkan unit. Got it? And the Mishkan unit's interesting because there's 5 chapters, the first Dibur, and then 6 short ones that are going to follow. But the first unit, I call the Shechina unit, which has a trailer with the Mizbach Toret, which highlights there's something special about the Mizbach Toret, but it all has to do with this encounter with God. And if I'm making a symbol of Har Sinai, it's not a place to pray. Of course, later we're going to pray there, but the goal of the Mishkan is not a place, oh, here's where you can pray and get special privileges. It's a reminder of the privilege of being human, of being thankful to God, recognizing there's one God who created everything and gave man the ability to be B'Tselem Elokim, the whole gift of life, and appreciating that and using your creativity properly. At the same time, a reminder of Har Sinai and the commitment to be a Mamleket Kohen B'Goy Kadosh, to be a nation in the service of God. And if that was the purpose of the Mikdash, when you go to Mikdash Mat, if you follow davening, remember the brachot in the morning, it's all about our relationship with God. Not only that He created, but why He created, and how He gave man all these different abilities, and recognizing God and praising God and thanking Him and remembering why you're chosen. It's Kabbalat Malchut Shamayim. All those elements, which the Mishkan was about, we have in our tefillah day to day. We'll dedicate a whole shir out later on. We'll show all these things inside the siddur. Okay, I'll just take questions real fast. Chat, I think probably just looking for the question from Bobby. I got through the link. Oh, no, source sheets, I got them. I'm also talking to Rabbi J. Okay, good. Okay, oh, here we go. Everyone who did not bring the Torah properly were killed. Okay, yesterday's parsha, all those who brought it. Okay, yeah. So it's dangerous, Torah. Got it? It's protected, but it's combustion. It can cause combustion, kind of thing. Does it automatically kill people? I mean, there's a danger. Remember, you can't make it. You can't play with it. Like, don't play with. Remember the special law. If you don't copy it. Don't copy the recipe and try it at home. You might explode. Not for. It's patented. So there's something very special about it. Again, why people die? That's a great question. Why is it so deadly? The Torah. With Uziel wanting to bring Torah and he gets Sarat. It's complicated, but it's whatever the reason is has to do with this idea of recognizing, usually what's going to happen when there's a sin of haughtiness and hubris. Oh, I can be so close to God. If your goal is being close to God, to be in the service of God, fine. When it's all about privilege, oh, how come I also want to be so close to God because I'm a big shot, because I'm a Anshe Shem, Seidah, like Uziel when he wants to go, I want to bring Torah because I'm a big shot. I'm so great. When wanting to bring Torah is a reflection of how great I am, it's going to backfire, which is the problem with Neder V'Nevi'u. God said, here's the protocol, and you broke protocol. So when the closest to God, it's all about me, then that's when it's bad. When it's all about God, then it's when it's fine. That's in a nutshell the way I understand it, but that's the thematic idea behind it. How it actually works with nature, with what's so dangerous about it in the chemical setup that I don't know. Already? Okay, we'll stop here. Everyone have a good week, and Baruch Hashem, we have better, what do you call it? I mean, the ceasefire is holding, and hopefully we'll have a cooking a deal up, hopefully, but we should pray for good news again.
A question?
Miracles. Question, go ahead, yeah.
When you spoke about Mizbach HaKtoret being in chapter 30 and not in 29, we weren't the ones who did the chapter divisions.
Oh yeah, so but the chapter division reflects something logical. Why? Because I was pointing out the Dibur. Right? The Dibur goes to the middle of chapter 30. So in the unit of God speaks to Moshe Rabbeinu in the beginning of chapter 25 and continues to the middle of chapter 30. So in that one Dibur includes the Mizbach Toret. But in that Dibur, 95% of it is enveloped by the Shechina unit, and then there's a trailer. But my unit is not the chapter division. My unit is the Dibur. Got it? Now the chapter division reflects logic. Got it? Because we'll see the Mizbach Torah is going to be in the same chapter with later on in chapter 30 where we make the Torah. There's the chapter division is more logical than the Dibur division.
The
We'll see.
chapter division was done by the Christians.
Yeah. But I'm saying, but it reflects common sense.
No, but sometimes they had like a
But
purpose.
sometimes they have agenda, but sometimes it's just common sense.
Anyway,
It's-
there's the kiyor there. What is the kiyor doing there?
That'll be next week. Okay.
Okay.
Because next week we have to see all the leftovers. The Mizbach Torah is not the only leftover. We have lots of leftovers. We have the kiyor as well. And we have Machzit Hashem. There's a lot of things that belong in the main unit that were left over. So we have to see what the leftovers are doing. That'd be a lot of fun. There's lots of leftovers, and there'll be logic to leftovers as well. Okay, so we'll stop here, and everyone have again a good week, and Mazel Tov again to Rabbi J, and we should only hear Smachot.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Sure.